Former Liberal leader Andrew Peacock has been remembered as one of Australia's political greats. He died at his home in Austin, Texas, aged 82. John Hewson served under Andrew Peacock and was Liberal Party leader from 1990 to 1994, and he joins me now. Dr Hewson, thanks so much for your time. Must have been difficult to hear the news of his passing.
Yeah, it was very sad. I mean, I had heard rumours that he hadn't been well, but it always comes as a surprise and very disappointing, really, to see that he has passed. As you say, he made a great contribution to politics in Australia, obviously to the development of the Liberal Party, and of course, as an Australian, to so much of an improvement in government, both from opposition and in government.
He was also quite well known by leaders all around the world, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, he had that period as foreign minister where he really did make a mark from our point of view. People say we punch above our weight. I mean, it's because people like Peacock had that sort of influence. Of course, he had good friendships in the United States, ultimately becoming our ambassador to the US. Very good friendship with Kennedy, for example, Ted Kennedy, that is. And, he could work the Hill better than most, I think, who've had that position. So, yes, he had standing, he had presence, and I always felt that he never really took himself too seriously, which was he had a capacity for self-deprecating humour. He could always keep a sense of perspective as to who he was and what he could realistically hope to achieve. And, when you ask him, did he feel bad about losing the prime ministership? And he said, no, when my horse lost, I felt bad about that. He's got that sense. He had that sense of humour all the time. And it was a good balance, really. He had some pretty powerful positions. I mean, he was minister for the army in the late 60s when we were in Vietnam, pre-selected to the Menzies seat in Kooyong in, I think, the middle 60s. Great expectations, the cult from Kooyong and all that. And then he went under a series of leaders in terms of Gorton and Snedden and Fraser, had his pluses and minuses with them, and then with and without Howard. And so, he went through some very difficult stages, but he always, as a minister or as a shadow minister, I think made a very real contribution. So while he had that sort of presence and that flamboyance and flair, on the other hand, there was a lot of substance behind it.
Can you tell the story about how the cult from Kooyong came about?
Well, I don't know what encouraged him to run. I mean, but anyone taking over the Menzies seat, which had been held for so long by a person who'd made such a great contribution as an Australian Prime Minister in total over something like 23 years, I mean, great expectations as to who was going to be pre-selected for that. And of course, he came in with a flash and established his presence pretty quickly. In those days, I think Andrew used to think that any publicity was good publicity, and he capitalised on it. But it did build expectations. But then he moved into the ministry at a very early age and went through that difficult period with the transition from, when Whitlam was on the rise, and we had Snedden for a period and Gorton for a period and McMahon for a period and then Fraser. He was there all the time, I think, myself, as a stabilising influence through that process.
What was the tension between John Howard and Andrew Peacock, and how did that sort of begin?
It played out in a number of ways. I mean, they had periods where, after the 83 election loss, and Peacock had already challenged Fraser before that loss. When Fraser lost and immediately retired, Andrew took over. I don't think people gave him much hope, really, against Hawke, who'd come with him with a great flourish and a great following. But he did better than expected in 84. And then he lost the leadership to Howard, and there were periods where he didn't want to serve for Howard, or Howard wouldn't serve for him, I should say. And, so the tensions built up. And my impression of that period was that in a sense, they were both wanting to be Prime Minister. But Howard wanted it a lot more than Peacock wanted it, in my view. And that reflected in their performance. But, of course, Peacock came back in the coup of 89. A bit of a big surprise to Howard and to most of us here, really. I think those who weren't part of that coup movement were caught short. Michael Bowman and I remember running numbers for Howard right through the night for trying to win people back. But, of course, the numbers were rock solid, and he won well. And and then from that point on, he ran a hard campaign in 1990. He did better than people have given him credit for. The National Party had a big swing against it. Peacock did win the two-party preferred vote marginally, but not by enough to win government. I think he reduced the seats from 24 to about 7 that the ALP held net. And in those terms, he came very close then. But after that, he decided he wouldn't stand again. It looked very, very much like Howard would stand. So that was the main motivation I stood. I didn't think we should go back to yet another part of a decade with Howard versus Peacock.
With international borders closed due to coronavirus, have you been in contact with any friends or families? It must be difficult for them to say goodbye in person.
No, I haven't. I went to see Andrew a few years ago in Austin, had lunch at his home with Penn, and funny incident there. As I was walking out of the house, I noticed in his garden he had one of those little fries, those sort of gnomes in the shape of a fry. I said, I didn't know you were a supporter of Matt Abbott. But he laughed, and we always had a side joke. But he seemed very much at home living in Austin. I think they spent a fair bit of the year in Paris and the rest of the year in Austin. But he had a pretty good life. He did for a period, of course, after he left as US ambassador, chaired Boeing in Australia for a while, and so on. But I think he was really settling down into that lifestyle with Penn, who had been she's very active in the Republican Party in the United States, very big campaigner for the Bushes, from Bush Senior and Bush Junior. I remember in their home there were many photographs of her with the Bushes, and I think, in a sense, Andrew was her token Liberal. She was a very conservative person, so it was an interesting match. But it's very hard to keep in touch with these people. I thought the other day I should ring him, and then, of course, I got the news on last night.
Mm. Well, John Hewson, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thanks for your thoughts today on Weekend Live.
No problem. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.